The rain was soaking through his threadbare coat, masking the tears he refused to let fall. He had $42 to his name, a severe asthmatic daughter waiting at home, and just lost his only source of income. Lucian thought his life was officially over. Then, the sky tore open. The fluorescent lights in Greg Hughes's office hummed with a sickly, relentless energy. Lucian Pendleton sat in the uncomfortable leather chair opposite his boss's massive mahogany desk, staring blankly at the single sheet of paper slid toward him. It was a termination notice. Standard boilerplate, entirely devoid of the human element. "I don't understand, Greg," Lucian said, his voice dangerously close to a tremor. He swallowed hard, forcing the panic down into his chest. "My performance reviews have been flawless for 5 years. I built the architecture for the predictive models this firm relies on." Greg Hughes, a man whose tailored Italian suits couldn't hide his utter lack of competence, leaned back and steepled his fingers. He had inherited his position at Kensington Risk Management through his father, and his resentment of Lucian's raw intellect had been a poorly kept secret since day one. "It's restructuring, Artie," Greg sighed, using the nickname Lucian despised. "The board feels we need to pivot. Your work on Project Aegis, it's too theoretical, too cautious. We need aggressive growth models, not fail-safes. Plus, there was that issue with insubordination last week." Lucian's jaw tightened. "Insubordination? You ordered me to bypass the liquidity stress test on the new derivatives portfolio. If those markets dip even 2%, the cascading failures will bankrupt our clients. I refused because it's illegal, Greg. And that lack of team spirit is exactly why we're letting you go," Greg said, his smile thin and devoid of warmth. "Security is waiting outside. You have 10 minutes to clear your desk. I'll be keeping your flash drives and your laptop, obviously." Company property. Lucian stood up, the room spinning slightly. He was a single father. His wife, Sarah, had passed away from ovarian cancer 3 years ago, leaving him with crushing medical debt and their beautiful, fragile daughter, Lily. Lily's asthma medication was $300 a month. Their rent in the cramped, damp apartment in the lower Queen Anne district of Seattle was due in 4 days. His 2008 Honda Civic was currently sitting in a mechanic's lot in Sodo, requiring a $600 transmission repair he had been saving up for. He had nothing left. The walk of shame through the bullpen was excruciating. Colleagues he had mentored suddenly found their monitors incredibly fascinating, avoiding his gaze as the 2 burly security guards escorted him to his cubicle. He packed his meager belongings into a cardboard box, a framed photograph of Sarah laughing on a beach in Oregon, a crayon drawing of a profoundly asymmetrical cat by Lily, and a worn ceramic coffee mug. "Let's go, Pendleton," one of the guards muttered, checking his watch. When the heavy glass doors of the Kensington building shut behind him, Lucian was hit by a wall of freezing, relentless Seattle rain. The sky was the color of bruised iron. He pulled his thin wool coat tighter around himself, the cardboard box growing instantly soggy in his arms. He couldn't afford a taxi. He couldn't even afford the bus fare without breaking the last $20 bill he needed for Lily's groceries that evening. So, he walked. It was a grueling 5-mile trek from the downtown financial district to his apartment. The rain quickly soaked through his cheap dress shoes, chilling him to the bone. Every step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the crushing reality of his situation. How was he going to look into Lily's trusting green eyes and tell her that her father was a failure? How was he going to keep the heat on? The walls of his life were closing in, the water rising rapidly, and he had no life raft. As he walked southward, crossing through the desolate industrial stretch near the train tracks, Lucian let his mind wander to the work he had been doing. Project Aegis. Greg had called it theoretical. What Greg didn't know was that Lucian had discovered a fundamental, catastrophic flaw in the automated trading algorithms used by the top 5 hedge funds in the country. He had built Aegis as a countermeasure, an intricate mathematical firewall. Just yesterday, he had locked the final version of the code behind a localized encryption key that only existed in his own mind, terrified that Greg would steal it and sell it to the highest bidder. Now the firm had his computers, but they didn't have the key. And frankly, Lucian didn't care anymore. Let the markets burn. Let Greg Hughes figure it out. All Lucian cared about was his little girl. He stopped under the rusted awning of an abandoned warehouse to catch his breath. His hands were numb, his clothes plastered to his skin. He leaned against the damp brick wall and finally let out a ragged, shattering sob. The stoic mask he wore for Lily, the professional facade he wore for his colleagues. It all crumbled. He was 34 years old, brilliant, broken, and utterly alone in the pouring rain. He wiped his face with a wet, shivering hand, taking a deep, shuddering breath. Just keep walking, he whispered to himself. Just get home to her. He stepped back out into the deluge. Lucian had made it to the edge of an empty, sprawling shipping lot, a massive expanse of cracked concrete bordered by rusted chain-link fences. It was a shortcut he sometimes took, completely devoid of cars and pedestrians. The only sound was the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the pavement and the distant, mournful wail of a freight train. Then, the air pressure changed. It wasn't a sound at first, but a physical sensation, a heavy, rhythmic thumping that vibrated in his chest cavity. Lucian stopped, squinting through the downpour. The sky above him, thick with low-hanging storm clouds, began to churn violently. The thumping escalated into a deafening roar. Suddenly, 2 massive matte black Sikorsky S-76 helicopters dropped through the cloud cover. They were moving with aggressive, terrifying precision. They had no news logos, no medical crosses, no police markings, just sleek, militaristic black. And they were descending rapidly, banking sharply to align with the empty concrete lot right in front of him. Lucian froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. The downdraft from the twin rotors hit him like a physical blow, sending a spray of freezing water and gravel stinging against his face. He dropped his cardboard box, the ceramic mug shattering on the concrete, Lily's drawing scattering into a puddle. He threw his arms up to shield his eyes, stumbling backward against the chain-link fence. What is happening? He thought wildly. Is it a police chase? A raid? The first helicopter touched down with a heavy thud 50 yards away, its rotors still spinning furiously. Almost instantly, the second helicopter landed in perfect symmetry beside it. Before the blades even began to slow, the side door of the lead chopper slid open. 4 men stepped out. They weren't police. They were dressed in immaculate, dark-tailored suits, their earpieces clearly visible, moving with the synchronized, lethal grace of high-end private security. They fanned out rapidly, securing a perimeter around the aircraft, their eyes scanning the desolate lot. One of them pointed directly at Lucian. Lucian's breath hitched. He looked behind him, assuming they were after someone hiding in the shadows of the warehouse. But there was no one. Just him, pinned against the fence in a soaked suit. 2 of the men began walking briskly toward him. Lucian's fight-or-flight response screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like lead. Where would he go? Who were these people? "Lucian Pendleton!" the lead security man yelled over the dying roar of the engines. Lucian's mouth went dry. "Yes?" he shouted back, his voice cracking. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. He simply tapped his earpiece and nodded back toward the helicopter. A figure emerged from the sleek cabin. The security men immediately shifted to flank her, holding large black umbrellas to shield her from the torrential rain. As she walked closer, the high heels of her designer boots clicking sharply against the wet concrete, Lucian realized who he was looking at. He had seen her face on the cover of Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg. Vivian Sterling. She was the CEO and sole inheritor of Sterling Rowe Holdings, an aggressively predatory private equity firm that controlled hundreds of billions in global assets. She was known in the financial world as the Ice Queen of Wall Street, a woman who dismantled legacy corporations for sport and built an empire on ruthless efficiency. She was 38, striking, with sharp, aristocratic features and piercing blue eyes that currently looked as stormy as the Seattle sky. She wore a tailored charcoal trench coat that probably cost more than Lucian had made in the last 3 years. She stopped 10 feet away from him. The security detail kept the umbrellas perfectly positioned over her, leaving Lucian standing in the pouring rain. She looked him up and down, taking in his soaked, shivering form, his ruined cheap shoes, and the broken coffee mug by his feet. "You're difficult to track down when your cell phone is disconnected due to unpaid bills, Mr. Pendleton," Vivian said. Her voice was surprisingly melodic, but laced with a commanding authority that demanded absolute obedience. I was just fired," Lucian stammered, completely bewildered. "What is this? What do you want?" "I know you were fired," Vivian replied coldly. "At 1:14 p.m. today by Gregory Hughes, an idiot of astronomical proportions. I know because at 9 a.m. this morning, Sterling Rowe finalized a hostile takeover of Kensington Risk Management's parent company. You essentially work for me now. Or rather, you did." Lucian stared at her, his mind struggling to process the information. "You bought Kensington?" "I bought the entire holding group." "Yes," Vivian said, stepping slightly closer. The intense blue of her eyes locked onto his. "And I did it for one reason, and one reason only. You." Lucian blinked, rain dripping from his eyelashes. "Me? I'm a mid-level risk analyst. I don't—" "You are the architect of Project Aegis," Vivian interrupted, her tone sharpening. "Yesterday, my automated algorithmic trading division initiated a massive, deeply leveraged series of trades in the Asian markets based on a predictive model your firm supplied. An hour ago, we realized the model has a fatal logic loop. It is currently executing self-replicating short sales that we cannot stop." Lucian felt the blood drain from his face. "The liquidity stress test. Greg forced the implementation without it." "Exactly," Vivian said, her composure slipping just a fraction, revealing the immense, terrifying pressure beneath. "My engineers are locked out. The entire system is cascading. We are bleeding $200 million every 15 minutes. In exactly 90 minutes, the margin calls will trigger a domino effect that will not only bankrupt Sterling Rowe, but likely crash 2 major global banks." She stepped out from under the umbrella, ignoring her security detail's protests, and walked right up to Lucian. The rain immediately began to soak her expensive coat and ruin her immaculate hair, but she didn't seem to care. "I read your internal memos, Lucian," she said, her voice dropping to an intense, desperate register. "The ones Hughes ignored. You built a kill switch into the Aegis architecture. You saw this coming." "Yes," Lucian breathed, stunned. "I isolated the core code. It requires a localized biometric handshake and a 64-character alphanumeric key. I memorized it." "Do you have a backup?" she demanded. "No, I didn't trust Hughes. It's only in my head." Vivian let out a sharp exhale, closing her eyes for a split second. When she opened them, the icy CEO was gone, replaced by someone fighting for their life. "Lucian," Vivian Sterling said, the rain pouring down her face. "You have exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes to save my empire. If you get in that helicopter right now and stop this hemorrhage, I will wire $5 million into your bank account the moment the bleeding stops. I will pay for your daughter's medical care for the rest of her life. I will give you Greg Hughes's job, his corner office, and his salary tripled." Lucian stood paralyzed, the freezing rain entirely forgotten. An hour ago, he was a broken man walking home to tell his daughter they were destitute. Now, a billionaire was standing in a puddle, begging him to save the global economy. "Well," Vivian asked, her voice cracking like a whip, "are you going to stand there and drown, Mr. Pendleton, or are you going to come fly with me?" Lucian didn't hesitate. He stepped past Vivian Sterling, the freezing rain instantly replaced by the deafening roar of the Sikorsky's twin turbines, and pulled himself into the luxurious, leather-lined cabin. Vivian followed immediately, the heavy door sliding shut and sealing them in a pressurized, sound-dampened world of mahogany trim and glowing avionics. Before Lucian could even fasten his 4-point harness, the helicopter banked violently, lifting off the concrete and tearing through the Seattle skyline. "Get me a direct line to the trading floor," Vivian snapped at a communications officer sitting in the jump seat. She turned to Lucian, her wet trench coat dripping onto the pristine floorboards. "We have 72 minutes before the New York Stock Exchange automated circuit breakers trigger a Level 3 market-wide halt. If that happens, the SEC freezes our assets, the margin calls default, and Sterling Row faces liquidation. Tell me exactly what you need." Lucian wiped the cold water from his eyes, his mind finally snapping back into the razor-sharp analytical mode that had defined his career. "First, I need my daughter secured," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Lily. She's at my apartment in Queen Anne with Mrs. Higgins, my neighbor. Lily has severe asthma. Her nebulizer is broken, and I don't have the medication she needs for an attack. If I'm doing this, I need to know she's safe." Vivian didn't blink. She grabbed a secondary satellite phone from the console. "Give me the address." Lucian rattled it off. Vivian punched a button. "This is Sterling. I want a private pediatric trauma team dispatched to the Lower Queen Anne district immediately. Address to follow via encrypted text. Spare no expense. Bring portable respiratory gear. If the child sneezes, I want a specialist looking at her. Move." She slammed the phone down and locked eyes with Lucian. "Done. Now, the algorithm." The algorithm, which I specifically warned Greg Hughes about, is a self-teaching high-frequency trading model, Lucian explained, grabbing a dry towel a security guard offered him. It's designed to find microscopic inefficiencies in dark pool liquidity, but without the Aegis limiter, it doesn't recognize risk ceilings. It sees a minor dip in blue-chip tech stocks, say Apple or Microsoft, and instead of hedging, it aggressively shorts them, leveraging your entire portfolio to maximize non-existent returns. It's heavily targeting the semiconductor sector right now, Vivian confirmed grimly, looking at an iPad handed to her by the comms officer. It's dumping billions we don't have into phantom short positions. Because it thinks it can force a market correction and buy back the dip, Lucien said, shaking his head. It's essentially trying to bankrupt the tech industry to make a 3% profit margin. I need a direct, hardwired terminal into your central routing hub. No wireless, no remote access. The Aegis kill switch has to be injected directly into the data stream that's communicating with the exchanges, or the algorithm will recognize it as a hostile virus and lock us out. We are landing on the roof of the Columbia Center, Vivian said, glancing out the window as the massive black skyscraper loomed through the rain. Sterling Row occupies the top 10 floors. My chief technology officer, Simon Hayes, is prepping a hardwired terminal on the primary server floor. We have 60 minutes. The helicopter touched down on the helipad with a heavy, shuddering jolt. The doors flew open, and Lucian was immediately flanked by Vivian's security detail. They rushed him across the rain-slicked roof, down a concrete stairwell, and through a set of reinforced steel biometric doors. The atmosphere on the 74th floor was pure, unadulterated panic. It was a sprawling, cavernous room, filled with rows of curved monitors. The ambient lighting was a harsh, warning track red. Dozens of analysts and engineers were shouting over each other, frantically typing lines of code, their faces illuminated by the terrifying downward spikes on the massive digital ticker wrapping around the ceiling. "Make way!" Vivian barked, her voice cutting through the chaos like a scythe. The room instantly parted for her. She led Lucian to the center console, a raised platform where a frantic, sweating man in a rumpled shirt, Simon Hayes, was furiously typing. But Simon wasn't the only one there. Standing behind the console, looking pale, terrified, and completely out of his depth, was Greg Hughes. Lucian stopped dead in his tracks. What is he doing here? Greg's head snapped up. When he saw Lucian standing next to Vivian Sterling, the color completely drained from his face. "Lucian, what? How did you—" "I summoned the executive board of Kensington Risk Management the moment the breach started," Vivian said coldly. "Mr. Hughes here has been trying to explain why the predictive model he authorized is currently trying to start the next Great Depression. Miss Sterling, I assure you, this is a sabotage attempt," Greg stammered, pointing a trembling finger at Lucian. "Pendleton was a disgruntled employee. I fired him this afternoon for insubordination. He must have planted a logic bomb in the code before he left. This is his fault." Lucian felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. He stepped forward, getting inches from Greg's face. "You bypassed the liquidity stress tests, Greg. I have the time-stamped emails proving I warned you, and the system logs proving you overrode my security locks, using your executive credentials at 8:15 a.m. this morning." Vivian looked at Simon Hayes. "Is that true, Simon?" Simon didn't look up from his monitor. "Yes, Ms. Sterling. The origin of the trading cascade traces back to a manual override initiated by Gregory Hughes. He authorized the deployment without the Aegis protocol." Vivian turned her icy gaze back to Greg. The silence that fell over the immediate area was heavier than the Seattle rain outside. "Security," Vivian said softly. Two massive men in suits stepped forward. "Escort Mr. Hughes to the holding room on the 71st floor. Confiscate his phone, his keys, and his wallet. Have our legal team draft a criminal referral to the SEC for gross negligence and corporate sabotage. He is to speak to no one." "Vivian, please, you can't," Greg begged, his voice cracking as the guards grabbed him by the arms and dragged him backward. "Artie, tell her! It was a mistake!" Lucian didn't even look at him as Greg was hauled out of the room. He sat down in the leather chair Simon hastily vacated. 45 minutes, Lucian," Vivian said, resting her hands on the back of his chair. "Save my company." Lucian stared at the massive array of monitors. The terminal in front of him was displaying a raw, Unix-based command line, a stark black box blinking with a solitary white cursor. Surrounding it were screens flashing catastrophic red numbers. Sterling Row was hemorrhaging capital at a rate of nearly $14 million a minute. "All right," Lucien muttered, cracking his knuckles. The exhaustion of the day vanished, replaced by the electric hum of adrenaline. This was his world. This was the architecture he built. "Simon, I need you to isolate the outbound routing nodes. Cut the feed to the secondary backup servers so the algorithm can't jump ship when I corner it." "Isolating routing nodes now," Simon confirmed, his fingers flying across a secondary keyboard. You have a direct, unshielded pipeline to the primary execution engine. Lucian closed his eyes for 3 seconds, visualizing the neural pathways of the code he had written over the past 3 years. Project Aegis wasn't just a firewall. It was a digital predator designed to hunt down rogue algorithms and terminate their execution strings. But he had locked it away securely. He opened his eyes and began to type. His fingers moved with blistering speed, injecting command lines that bypassed the Sterling row security layers to reach the buried Kensington architecture. Plaintext greater than override underscore authorization, Pendleton underscore a greater than initiate underscore Aegis underscore protocol underscore beta greater than awaiting underscore biometric underscore handshake. A small fingerprint scanner beside the keyboard flashed green. Lucian pressed his right thumb onto the glass. Plaintext greater than biometric underscore match. Failed. Greater than error 403. User underscore profile underscore terminated. Lucian's blood ran cold. He tried again. Plaintext greater than biometric underscore. Match. Failed. What's happening? Vivian asked, the tension radiating from her in waves. Why is it rejecting you? Greg, Lucian snarled, his heart hammering against his ribs. When he fired me, he didn't just take my laptop. He purged my user profile from the Kensington Active Directory. The biometric handshake relies on an active employee ID. The system doesn't recognize me as an authorized user anymore. Can you bypass it? Simon asked, panicking. If we don't deploy Aegis in the next 20 minutes, the margin calls hit Goldman Sachs, and we are functionally bankrupt. Lucian stared at the blinking cursor. If he couldn't get past the biometric lock, the 64-character key was useless. He needed a back door. He needed to trick the system into thinking he was still an administrator. Simon, pull up the kernel-level access logs for the Kensington migration this morning, Lucien ordered. Greg used his executive credentials to force the deployment. His biometric data is still cached in the temporary migration files. Pulling it up? Simon said. Wait, you want to spoof Hughes's credentials? I'm going to rip his digital signature from the cache and wrap it around the Aegis deployment protocol, Lucian said, his hands blurring across the keyboard as he wrote a terrifyingly complex string of extraction code. It's a blind injection. If I miss a single packet of data, the algorithm will recognize the intrusion and permanently lock the mainframe. Sweat beaded on Lucian's forehead. The noise of the trading floor faded into a dull roar. There was only the screen, the code, and the ticking clock. He isolated Greg's encrypted biometric hash, formatted it into a payload, and aimed it at the Aegis locked door. Deploying spoof, Lucian whispered, hitting the enter key. The screen froze for agonizing seconds. Plaintext greater than biometric underscore spoof underscore accepted. Greater than enter underscore 64 underscore character underscore alpha underscore numeric underscore decryption underscore key. I'm in, Lucian breathed. Do it, Vivian ordered softly. This was the moment. The key existed nowhere on Earth except in Lucian's synapses. He had generated it using a complex cipher based on the dates of his wife's cancer treatments, Lily's birth weight, and a sequence of prime numbers. It was impossible to brute force. Lucian placed his hands over the keyboard. He took a deep breath. Picturing Lily's face, he typed 79 XQL 4 PZ2 VM 8 NC 5 BH1 JK 3 FR 6 WY 0 DG 9 SA 2 VB 4 NM 7 CX 5 ZV1 LK 8 JH 3 GF 6 DD 9 SA 2 QW 4. He didn't look at the keys. He didn't look at the screen. He just let muscle memory and pure, desperate concentration guide his hands. He typed the final character and smashed the enter key. Plaintext greater than key underscore accepted. Greater than Aegis underscore protocol underscore engaged. Greater than initiating underscore hostile underscore termination underscore sequence. Instantly, the massive screens wrapping the ceiling of the trading floor stuttered. The terrifying cascade of red numbers froze. In the terminal box in front of Lucian, lines of code began scrolling at light speed as the Aegis protocol hunted down the rogue algorithm, severing its connections to the dark pools, cancelling its pending short sale orders, and erecting an impenetrable mathematical wall around the remaining capital. "Look at the NYSE feed," a trader shouted from across the floor. On the main broadcast monitor, the terrifying downward plunge of the S&P 500 halted. It leveled off. Then slowly, the numbers began to turn green as the market realized the massive artificial selling pressure had vanished. "Pending orders cancelled," Simon announced, his voice trembling with relief. "Margin exposure is dropping. The bleeding has stopped. We stabilized." A heavy, stunned silence blanketed the 74th floor, followed a second later by a deafening eruption of cheers, applause, and relieved shouting. Analysts were hugging each other. Traders were collapsing into their chairs. Lucian leaned back, completely drained. His hands were shaking violently. He stared blankly at the green text, confirming the system was safe. Vivian Sterling exhaled, a long, shaky breath that finally betrayed her humanity. She walked around the console and stood in front of Lucian. The Ice Queen of Wall Street looked down at the soaked, exhausted single father who had just saved her empire. She didn't smile, but the fierce, predatory coldness in her eyes had been replaced by profound respect. "Simon," Vivian said, not looking away from Lucian. "Draft a wire transfer for $5 million. Route it to an offshore holding account in Mr. Pendleton's name, tax-free. Execute it immediately." "Yes, Ms. Sterling." Vivian reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her satellite phone, handing it to Lucian. "The pediatric team arrived at your apartment 20 minutes ago. The lead physician is holding on line 1. Your daughter is breathing perfectly normally, Lucian. She is safe." Lucian took the phone, a tear finally escaping and tracking down his cheek. "Thank you," he choked out. "Don't thank me," Vivian replied, smoothing the lapels of her damp coat. "Take tomorrow off, Lucian. Buy a new car. Spend time with your daughter. But be back here on Monday at 8 a.m. sharp. You have Greg Hughes's corner office to decorate, and as my new global head of risk management, we have a lot of work to do." Lucian pressed the phone to his ear, listening to the steady, comforting voice of the doctor, assuring him Lily was fine. As he looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Seattle skyline, the heavy storm clouds finally began to break, letting a single, piercing ray of afternoon sunlight wash over the city. Lucian's journey from the despair of the freezing rain to the pinnacle of a global financial empire was forged by the unbreakable bond of a father's love. He didn't save the world for the money or the prestige. He cracked the code because a billionaire promised to protect his little girl. In the end, the most complex algorithm ever written was no match for a father who simply needed to get home.